summarize the question for the recording is, you notice that we're using and talking to the Magnum side or COE cluster. How does that tie into the cluster API? So this is a thing that is like actually the other way around. So the driver is actually the cluster. It's a cluster API driver for Magnum using the OpenStack provider. So essentially, what we do is when we create a cluster inside Magnum, this driver that we've built, essentially, if we go in here, it creates a cluster inside. It creates a cluster inside of the cluster API in what we call the management cluster, if you're familiar with the cluster API references. And it pretty much takes all of the different things that we have given to it. So for example, here, we said we have all these different, values that we can enable and disable. We've got the auto scaler. So essentially, before Magnum used to be this complex thing that would create heat stacks and push them to heat. Now it's actually doing the same thing, but except it's generating YAML and pushing it to the Kubernetes, where cluster API is then actioning and doing all of that. So if we look into Capo system, which is the Capo controller manager, you can see the logs for it. And it's kind of doing the reconciling and creating of machines and everything, like creating network components and all of that. So that's all happening there. And I have a slide here that I was going to share at the end, which includes the link to the actual driver, advanced thrift. So essentially, this is the driver where things kind of happen. And as you'll see, it's kind of just an implementation. So when you go to, there's a create cluster, essentially it calls into the create cluster, which creates all the different resources that are necessary on your behalf. So the idea is that users don't have to either have their own management cluster for CAPI, nor do they have to understand how CAPI and Capo works. For them, they can use the same Terraform code or Ansible code or the CLI that they used to work with Magnum, and it'll just work out of the box without them having to do anything.